So I mainly work on international agricultural trade issues, as well as issues affecting food choice in rich and poor countries. But this particular research was inspired by internet memes. In fact, the exact meme was a bit too tasteless to include in this program, but the point is, the internet inspired this, right? And as I saw these memes and I actually read news articles, one of the things that I became interested in is, can I explain this economically, right? Why are eggs currently so expensive, right? You have this protein product, right? The cheapest protein, right, relative to all other protein sources. And then all of a sudden we see, right, prices increase far more than we've ever seen sort of throughout the history, right, of sort of egg production and egg prices. And so the next slide is going to show you egg prices since around 2009, right? And one of the things you could see from this slide is that for the most part, egg prices have been relatively steady, right? So you do see producer prices as well as retail prices in this slide, and you see the significant increase in 2022, right? Other than what you see in 2015, both are actually explained by the same phenomenon. All right, and so if you compare December of last year to December 2022, what we've seen is an increase in prices at the producer level of about 192%, and at the retail level, 138%. And so the question is, what causes this, right? What's actually sort of the issue? Is it a conspiracy? Are we talking about companies actually sort of purposely making prices higher? Well, I know there's some folks who would say that, but in reality, economics explains it. Partly what explains it is this unprecedented amount of bird flu that we actually saw in 2022. And in fact, if you know anything about disease response protocols in the United States, it doesn't necessarily even need to be an infected bird, but actually an area gets depopulated because of how harmful this disease is to human health. All right, and so this slide actually shows bird losses over time, and you see these two huge peaks, and those represent periods where we had high avian influenza outbreaks within the sector. But clearly, when we have these high outbreaks, what do we see in return? A decrease in the amount of layers in the sector, so hence you get less eggs being produced. And a lower amount of eggs actually being produced leads to clearly higher prices due to decreased supply. And so when you get this major bird loss, right, you hear in the news that this is actually the explanation. And what my research is going to show is that this only explains part of the story, not all of the story. But certainly it explains enough to where we don't have to sort of resort to conspiracy theories. So now for some economic theory, right? So if you think about supply and demand, right? So prices can go up based on two things. There's demand pull, meaning as consumers, we want more for reasons other than prices, and that actually drives up prices. But then there's cost push, right? That as supply or the cost of production increases, these costs actually drive up prices. So as a result, you get these two combining effects, right? I pride myself on being a time series econometrician. And so one of the things I wanted to do in this study was to actually look at the factors that derive or cause egg prices and see, right, if these factors actually could explain price changes and not conspiracy theory. And so what I'd like to do next is just sort of get to some results of my econometric analysis. I'll jump right in. And so these results are really just showing the percentage responsiveness of either producer prices in the long run or retail egg prices in the long run to these three factors that I considered on the supply side: natural gas prices, feed costs, as well as a measure of bird loss relative to the size of the layer population. And one of the things you could see with these estimates, I don't have time to explain each one, but that bird loss is the most impactful in terms of size, right? You could see that a 1% increase in bird loss leads to about a 1.5% increase in producer prices, as well as a 1.5 or 1.46% increase in retail prices. So using these estimates, I tried to break down sort of the overall increase in price that we saw in 2002 relative to the last 3 years. And here are the results that I have. That a big part of this is really about higher feed costs, higher natural gas prices, as well as sort of bird loss. And it almost appears that bird loss is compounding the effects of sort of feed costs and natural gas prices. So many studies blamed it solely on avian influenza and bird loss, but just using the data, we actually see something that's slightly different. Now, why is that the case? It's because natural gas, important to egg production, prices are up 143%. For feed costs, prices are up 37%. But now if you compare these two prices and how they've increased relative to bird loss, you could see that bird loss has increased only about 19.4%. So even though it's the most important in terms of overall estimation, but in terms of the impacts of contributing variables, you find that bird loss does matter, but feed costs over time, as well as natural gas prices over time, matter even more so. And it appears that bird loss has sort of compounded that. So what's the point here? There is no conspiracy theory. That's the message to take out to the public, right? That the economist at UT says economics explains it all, and that feed and natural gas expenses really contribute. So with that, I thank you, and you all have a good night.